Let me just wait for this ad. Alright, so I think we're live. Hey everybody, my name is Clayton, and if you're just joining us, this is my weekly, was weekly, now bi-weekly, fantasy football show. Uh, Today, what we're going to do is just go over waiver wire targets, and I'm sorry it's late. I'm still trying to figure out a schedule for this Tuesday show. Um, Mainly because unlike Friday, where it's clearly like I clearly have time set out. I'm still trying to get like a block of time on Tuesday that works for not only me but potentially for people who would be in the chat. So today is kind of just really feeling it out and just a quick stream. Unlike most shows would go an hour plus. Tonight won't be that long at all. I think we should be done around 9. So if you're just stopping by and you missed this or catching this on YouTube or some other avenue, I just wanted to say that I really still appreciate your support. And we're still trying to figure out the Tuesday show. So if there's anything that you would like to see or something that you think is needed in the Tuesday show, please let me know. Because, again, this is kind of trial, training, test out kind of show that we're doing today. Um, so, first thing, what I'm going to be talking about on Tuesdays, the thing that I thought of was needed was to add a component where people are gearing up for their next week in fantasy football. And the way to do that, I thought, was to discuss the waiver wire. The waiver wire, if you're completely new to fantasy football, is where you're picking up and dropping players on a week-to-week basis. And depending on where you are in your league, depends on your waiver wire priority. So if you're not doing so well, I mean, it's still early in the season. There's still a lot of things you can do to change the look of your team. And that's kind of what the waiver wire is designed to do. And what this show is designed to do on Tuesday is to go over players at each of the positions that we have in fantasy football. So wide receiver, running back, tight end, quarterback, and defense. And look at each one and see some waiver wire targets. And I'm basing this availability on a 12-team league. So when I'm going to show you the waiver wire, I'm showing you based on a 12-team league. So it may be more sparse than a league that has 10. So we're going to go over the 12-team league first, and I'm going to talk about my kind of deeper waiver wire targets. But then I'll probably switch over to a 10-team league waiver wire. And that way you can see, which is like a standard league NFL waiver wire. So if you're just on a Yahoo Fantasy League or an NFL.com league, this is probably the waiver wire you're going to see as a 10-team, like if you just joined now or something like that. So what we're going to do right now is just kind of go over that, and from there, I thought it would probably be best to not only talk about the waiver wire targets that I have, but potentially, if anybody else in the chat or anybody comes by, talk about who you think or who you will want to add to your team. And then I'm also going to talk about who to drop. So when we're going through this list, I'm going to talk about why you're dropping a player at this point in the season. And there is a number of reasons. There's a number of things that go into that. And one of them is injury. We've had some big injuries in the past week. You had Tony Romo going down for multiple weeks. Des Bryant's been gonna be out for multiple weeks. Um, Players who aren't as big of names but are important. Drew Brees is as big of a name, and he has a rotator cuff injury. We're not sure how long he's going to be out. Matthew Stafford might not play this Sunday. So there's a lot that goes on in terms of injuries that I think we're going to try to address more on the Friday show. But right now, it's something that I wanted to talk about in preparing yourself for the next week. If you have an injured player, what you need to do, what you need to be looking for. Say you have an injured wide receiver like Des Bryant, you're gonna need to pick up a wide receiver on the waiver wire, or unless you're really deep at the position, or if you have a running back who's injured. Eddie Lacy went down and cost me a game this fantasy week because he only had 9 yards rushing before he went out with an ankle injury. Do you pick up his backup? Are there replacements available for the players that you need? So I'm going to go through that, and that will be kind of the crux of this show. It's going to be a shorter stream, especially because I'm not sure many people know about Tuesday yet. And I'm trying to get together not only a Twitter account, but a YouTube. Last episode 2, which I put up on YouTube, got copyright hit because it featured a clip from that I was showcasing like why I thought Doug Martin could be a useful fantasy back, and I used some NFL footage. So I now know that I can't just play that, not with audio, not with video. So there's gonna be, I'm still trying to work out how to best utilize different measures. Like that's why we're at right now. This is Google, which you have the NFL schedule, so we can just talk about some games coming up and why some players are waiver wire targets. And the other thing is we're just going to look at a list of NFL players. So well, let's start here. Let's start with the list of waiver wire targets. So this is the waiver wire I was talking about for a 12-team league. So you have this is based. Also, your waiver wire will be based on your league's fantasy scoring. This league that I'm in is one of my money leagues, and its fantasy scoring is weighted towards quarterbacks. So in this league, you have a bunch of quarterbacks at the top because their touchdowns are are 6 point touchdowns versus 4, which is the normal for most fantasy leagues. But the first position I'm going to talk about, and it's one of the two positions that most people target on the waiver wire, are wide receiver and running back. Running back this year is particularly interesting because there have been some injuries, but there is also very, very little in terms of depth. So when looking at the running back position, Matt Jones is going to be a hot waiver wire ad this week for 2 reasons. One, he split carries with Alfred Morris and had a very, very good game. He rushed for 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 23 yards running. He also plays Thursday Night Football against the Giants. The Giants' rushing defense has not been good this season, not been good to start this season. So a lot of people are probably looking at Matt Jones to be added to their fantasy team and plug him in immediately to a flex spot, or maybe as high as an RB2. So that's why I think that Matt Jones is probably going to be, unless you have really high waiver wire priority, he's probably going to be gone. He's owned in very few leagues. 1.4% of leagues he's owned. So this week, I think is the week that you're going to see a surge in that number. He's probably going to be owned in at least 40 for 50% of NFL.com leagues. He scored 24.6 points. I don't expect it to be that high, only because I think Alfred Morris will still control that timeshare. I think he'll still get more carries. Alfred Morris in the last game was like 1 or 2 carries behind the 19 that Jones received. But Washington ran the ball heavy, and that's because Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. It's not RG3. It's not Kirk Cousins has a turnover problem. So the coaches in Washington are really trying to pound the ball on the ground to relieve a lot of that pressure. Um, and I think it only bodes well for Matt Jones, but at the same time, he's probably going to be gone unless you have a very high waiver wire priority. So there are other players like Deion Lewis is the top scorer in my fantasy league for running backs, and he's still unowned. He's actually unowned in a lot of leagues. He's only owned in 12.6% of the leagues. Um, but he's in the situation that nobody wants. He's in New England. New England is known for really playing to their opponent's strength or weaknesses. And in terms of running backs, it's important to note this because they will feature different running backs based on what they want to do against different teams. So they're going against Jacksonville this week. And Jacksonville is a very weak defense. So they're probably, like this past week, they threw it 59 times, which bode well for Deion Lewis because he's a smaller, quicker running back. So in situations where you have a lot of wide receivers or multiple tight end packages, where you're sending a lot of people out, he was getting a lot of those yards, and especially because he got 98 yards receiving. That's the big thing. His receiving yards were very large, very huge, and that's what makes him a viable fantasy player. He does have a bit of a fumbling problem, which also I think scares people because when you have a player with a bit of a fumbling issue, especially in a really aggressive coach like Bill Belichick, Bill Belichick, Tom Coughlin, you're kind of older coaches. Traditionally, if a guy has a couple fumbles, they'll bench him, and then they'll go to the next man up. And especially in Bill Belichick's case, where he's not married to any running back whatsoever. And Deion Lewis is a guy who was just signed in the offseason as a backup, kind of playing a small role. He's not somebody that they are invested in. So I think that also kind of bodes to this aspect or this thought process of it might be a little bit difficult to trust a Deion Lewis. So there's a lot of things at play in the running back position, but those two, Matt Jones, Deion Lewis, are kind of your known ads. But one ad that might not pop off to people right away is James Starks, and that's because Eddie Lacy's injury to his ankle, it's still unknown whether or not he's going to be able to play this week. If he plays against the Chiefs, they said they could split reps, according to ESPN Wisconsin. One of these media session, we could play 50-50 with Eddie and James. Lacy will be consumed with treating his right ankle this week, with Thursday providing the first window in potential availability for Week 3. So they're not sure what Eddie's going to be. If Eddie Lacy's out, James Starks is a great pickup the morning of, or even if they know he's ill, or even if he's like very limited in practice on Thursday and Friday. I would think that James Starks might be a really hot ad late in the week. You might want to jump on that bandwagon if you have like a lot of roster flexibility and don't have a waiver wire priority position. It might be good for you to just jump on James Starks in the off chance that Eddie Lacy doesn't play. And then you set yourself up to have a very good running back against Kansas City, who's a decent team, but in looking at their game against Denver this past week on Thursday night, they had some issue, not with the run, but in their back end, their linebacking core. A lot of Peyton Manning stuff that he completed and scored on were intermediate routes. So, and you're facing a Green Bay line that is much better than Denver, so they'll be able to get some more push. Kansas City Chiefs line is very good, but they're more pass rushers than run stoppers. You want to get James Houston tired. You want to run the ball at them a little bit more. Green Bay's still going to throw, obviously, but keep the pressure on with a running attack, um, especially because they're going to be at home at Lambeau. So Green Bay and the running back game in Green Bay is particularly interesting to watch for that reason. Some other names on this waiver wire list that I don't. Well, the one name that I would say is probably a good bet is Chris Johnson. Mainly because Andre Ellington, the starter, is still injured. And because of this, there's really an opening for running backs in that system. David Johnson outscored Chris, but Chris Johnson got 20 carries. So 20 carries in an offense that's pretty upbeat, pretty high volume. The only problem is he might not get a lot of red zone looks, mostly because he's a quicker back, and also because Arizona has Larry Fitzgerald, who's seen a resurgence this year, and he's been playing lights out. He had 3 touchdowns, I want to say, this past weekend, and that kind of, and Larry Fitzgerald's a possession receiver, so at the goal, around the red zone, they might be looking Fitzgerald rather than running the ball. So he might be a more difficult play, but if you're looking for a flex, if you're looking for an RB3, flex 2, he might be somebody that you consider putting in there, just because 20 carries is a lot. Even with a rookie who they want to incorporate more in the offense, the rookie had 5 carries. He exploded for like a long touchdown off of one of those carries. So he might eat a little bit into that 20 carry number, but at the same time, I think they're relying on Chris Johnson to be the bell cow while Andre Ellington's out. And again, this goes back to what we were saying earlier, just about how important injuries can be in looking at the waiver wire. But that kind of goes through the running back position. And now we're going to talk about the other position that's also pretty light this year in terms of quality, and it's the wide receiver position. So there are a couple names that jumped out at me. One being a player that I think at the beginning of the fantasy year I had kind of my eye on, but for a different reason. I picked up Marcus Wheaton in the draft, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because Martavis Bryant is serving 4-game suspension to start the season. So you thought that Marcus Wheaton would cement himself as the number 2 receiver in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's got a great offense, as we saw this weekend when they lit up San Francisco. Great offense. However, Marcus Wheaton's like 4 or 5 in terms of the pecking order. And the reason being, you have Antonio Brown, clearly number 1, clearly going to get you at least 5 catches, the most guaranteed wide receiver in fantasy football right now. But then you have Heath Miller, and for some reason, Darius Hayward-Bay. And Darius Hayward-Bay is being used as the deep threat, the go long, go route wide receiver. He's also been targeted more than Wheaton in deep over the middle routes. So Wheaton is kind of in this position of not having really a go-to place on the roster. And because of that, it's kind of hard for me to suggest that Wheaton be a viable fantasy option anymore. Like, I ended up dropping it. The person who picked him up in the league that I dropped him in hasn't started him, hasn't played him, and he's probably, I think he'll be used as waiver wire fodder this week if that person in my league wants to pick up somebody, because he just hasn't shown any kind of potential to be the number 2 in Pittsburgh. And with that, you're also, his window is closing, because he had week 1, he had week 2, we're at week 3. After week 4, Martavis Bryant's back, and Martavis Bryant, the word out of camp was that he was gonna be the man next to Antonio Bryant. He had a good chemistry with Roethlisberger, so all these things kind of pointed to him being, a good ad, a good special ad. So my thought was that Wheaton could cement a number 2 role before Bryant came back from a suspension, But because he hasn't done that, and because it doesn't look like he will do that, he becomes a very, very easy waiver wire fodder target. And that's one of the things you got to look at your roster when you're looking at players to replace is who is falling out of favor, who is whose their window is shrinking in terms of being viable. Um, do they have a situation where there's a fresh rookie or a younger player that's coming to take their position, coming to take their spot? So, what do you do in that situation? And it looks like Whedon is one of those players that you can drop. So, let's talk about players you can pick up. One player that I'm interested, very interested in, is Travis Benjamin. He's the top wide receiver scoring-wise in my league by about 18 points. He's got 204 yards. He's had 2 very good games. This last game, he had 2 touchdowns on 3 passes. He also had a touchdown on a punt return. Now, one thing they say in fantasy football is you shouldn't go chasing points. Like, you shouldn't look at last week and say, oh, gotta get him because he exploded last week. But Travis Benjamin is a player that I like. And the reason I like him is because as long as Johnny Manziel continues to be the quarterback, you're going to have these busted plays. You're going to have these plays where Johnny Manziel just kind of runs around and gets open. And Travis Benjamin is over the top. So Johnny Manziel throwing deep balls to Travis Benjamin, you only need him to catch one. And as long as they're playing fairly poor competition, like they played a poor team in Tennessee, they actually played a good team in the Jets, and he still got 89 yards in a touchdown because of that long ball. He's going to get maybe, as if he gets one of those a week, even if it's not a touchdown, even if it's a 60, 70 yarder, and picks up 1 or 2 catches elsewhere, I think that bodes well for his fantasy stock. The other thing is he has a rapport with Manziel, and if Manziel continues to be the quarterback going forward, that hopefully will end up meaning more and more targets. Cleveland's been running the ball a lot, but in their upcoming games, like games against Oakland, which Oakland will be a fairly close game, but San Diego, Baltimore, Denver, St. Louis, these are teams that are on paper better than the Cleveland Browns. So in those games, when you're playing from behind, when you have to throw it up, that's why I like Travis Benjamin in that slot, that position. And hopefully that means that you have a wide receiver who's relatively unknown in most leagues, gives you some utility, and hopefully ends up being a really good player down the line. So along with Hayward Bay and Travis Benjamin, the 2 other players that I want to talk about, and I'll only touch on them briefly because I have to go through a couple of the positions, is Doug Baldwin and Leonard Hankerson. Leonard Hankerson is interesting because he's technically the 3rd wide receiver on Atlanta, but he's outplaying Roddy White right now. And Atlanta is going into a stretch where they're going to start playing teams with very weak secondaries. They go to Dallas, who has a pretty weak secondary. They go to Houston, who has a good front 7, but a weak secondary. Then they go to Washington, who has a very weak secondary. New Orleans, who has maybe the weakest secondary in the league. Tennessee, Tampa Bay, San Francisco. So, he's an interesting play because of his matchups. He's got great matchups going forward. The running back situation in Atlanta is in flux. They have a running back who's injured. And then you have him outplaying Roddy White last game. Roddy White, who's, a Falcon stalwart, just not getting a catch. And Leonard Hankerson being targeted twice in the red. So he actually caught 2 touchdown passes. One came back because of a penalty on Atlanta. So he's being targeted in the red zone, which is also something that you have to consider when you're looking at wide receivers particularly. He's being targeted in the red zone, and he's a sure-handed receiver. He played at Washington, but wasn't ever utilized, and he has a much better quarterback situation in Atlanta. So he's somebody who I would suggest looking at. And he's probably not going to go off the board. He's somebody who's not, most people won't priority target. So you can get him later on. Hey, Miner. How you doing? We're just talking about waiver wire this week. And if this is based on a 12-team league, the list I'm going through, but as we continue to go through that list, the last receiver that I was going to mention was Doug Baldwin, and Doug Baldwin is a wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, and he's the number one target in Seattle. Now, Seattle has always been a troubling place for wide receivers because you're not sure whether you're going to get week to week. Russell Wilson tends to be a good quarterback, but he just spreads it around so much that it's hard to say whether or not he's going to be useful to you. So because of this, it's just rough to go with one player or another in Seattle. I think Jimmy Graham is still the player to own in that receiving core at tight end, but because Russell Wilson spreads it out, because Seattle's kind of in a situation where they don't know who they should be playing, they don't know who's going to be able to step up. It's just hard to give any of them a good grade. The one thing I will say for Doug Baldwin is he will get the targets you need out of a wide receiver, and that's important. But at the same time, they also have a stretch of games coming up where they face mediocre secondaries. So there's a lot of things to say in support of Doug Baldwin. The only thing I would say in detriment is that there is a superior pass-catching threat who Seattle's going to want to get involved in, Jimmy Graham, that they paid a lot for, that they traded a lot for, and I think that he's going to be the one who's going to come out ahead. But Doug Baldwin may be somebody worth owning. I just don't think you put him as a priority in your waiver wire ads this week. The last two positions are tight end and quarterback, and those, I mean, we really don't have much to say about quarterback. I'm going to continue my trumpeting of you need Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor is a player that I think that has gone unowned long enough. You have enough body of work over the preseason and going into this week that he's somebody you need to own. He's a rushing quarterback. He scores. He gets about 40 yards rushing. That's 4 points per game. He has good matchups going forward. Obviously, New England was a good matchup on paper, but he struggled with turnovers. But still, you have Miami, whose defense is in flux. New York Giants, whose defense is in flux. Tennessee, who just got beat up. Cincinnati's a better defense. And then the Jags before the bye. So you have, out of his next 5 games, one bad matchup. So, I mean, if you're hurting at the quarterback position, please consider picking up Tyrod Taylor. He's only owned in 7.7% of NFL standard leagues. So he's a player that you can readily go out and get. I think people are still going to be kind of down on him just because he did have a lot of turnovers. They don't consider him like a true number one quarterback. And there are quarterbacks out there like Nick Foles, Ryan Fitzpatrick, who I'm going to talk about in a second. And, you know, replacements, Joe Flacco, other quarterbacks out there, Johnny Manziel, who are bigger names. But I think Tyrod Taylor is such a good athlete and a good player that he should be on your fantasy roster. The other two players I want to talk about are Brandon Weeden, who's replacing Tony Romo. The only thing I will say about Brandon Weeden is Dallas has such a good offensive line that Brandon Weeden has a shot to be very good. Without Des Bryant, if Des Bryant was in the offense, then it would be a no-brainer. But without Des Bryant in the offense, oh, you. I got lucky trying to get cute with Menzel won your matchup. Okay, cool. I'm glad you won your matchup, but like we were saying, I think that Menzel risk wise was a good pick because you need to catch up, but Cam actually got the carries that we thought he would in the red zone because Jonathan Stewart has kind of disappeared there. Um, yeah, but I'm talking mostly waiver wire today, so you haven't missed much. These are probably things you already know drinking. But so I'm kind of going over waiver wire targets. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the Tuesday show. Like what time, when we are going to kind of get a when we're going to be able to broadcast it because I've like Friday's so easy, so like I know what time I can get on. Tuesday I've got so much stuff like coming from work and trying to catch up with and going into tomorrow. Uh, but we'll see. I like having a show. I like being able to talk about the waiver wire targets and stuff. But I also kind of want to talk about some of last week's stuff too. But yeah. Well, the one thing I like about Tyrod Taylor is he's going against Miami, and the other thing is he's Buffalo's offense is surprisingly good. Um, like they kind of came back against New England. I know the game was kind of over at that point, and New England kind of let him back in the game. But he's getting so many rushing yards. Like Johnny Manziel's thing that I saw this past weekend, and one reason I think the swap is good is because Taylor is still getting your 40 yards. He's still getting your scampers. Manziel is trying to, be more conservative. Like he's only throwing for around 200 yards a game. I think he had less this week. Um, he's getting touchdowns. He's getting touchdown passes. Travis Benjamin's actually a player that I like, the wide receiver for Cleveland, who Manziel seems to have a good rapport with. But at the same time, I think that Tyrod Taylor has so many weapons in, like shovel passes to LaShawn McCoy, and the fact that you have Carlos Williams and to kind of break that up. He can hand it off a bunch, but when he throws it, he's kind of airing it out. He's got Percy Harvin. He's got Robert Woods, Sammy Watkins. He's got gunners on the outside, players with a lot of talent. So when you surround yourself with that much, when Buffalo has that much talent around one player, it makes him like. I just really like Tyrod Taylor. I'm actually gonna try to pick him up this week. I don't really need him, but I want to try to trade one of my quarterbacks for a wide receiver. Like I have both Peyton Manning and Ben Roethlisberger. So in this money league that I'm talking about, and Ben did great this weekend. I started Peyton because I wanted people to see that I still had confidence in him, and therefore hopefully up his trading value. But I can roll with Ben from here on out. I mean, T.Y. Hilton, I think, is a better overall player. T.Y. Hilton is but they're both quicker receivers, smaller, quicker receivers. Um, Benjamin also returns punts and kickoffs, so if you get points for returns, Benjamin might be a very good pickup there. Um, T.Y. Hilton's got much better hands and is also a more polished route runner. Benjamin is a fly guy. He's your go route dude. That's why I think that in the Cleveland system, when they're going to be hammering the ball and running and running and running, if you only have a guy that's going to get 5 targets in a game, those targets to be deep. You want him to be deep threats. And he had, like, if you look at his past 2 games, I'll bring it up real quick. His past 2 games, 89 yards receiving, and last week 115 yards receiving. Both weeks he had touchdowns, and both weeks you have long bombs in the game. So he's unlike Ty. Ty is gonna get you more catches. He can do more after the catch. He can. He's probably a little bit more elusive. Benjamin is just the person I say would be best suited to get you kind of a more out of the wide receiver position in terms of a week by week basis. Benjamin's going to get you the huge game versus T.Y. Hilton, I think, being more constant and probably better for your team because he'll have his breakout games too. And especially once Indianapolis kind of figures out what they're doing on offense. Because I still think that this goes back to what you were talking about a couple weeks ago. Their running game. Frank Gore just doesn't look there. So when you're talking about like a backup like Josh Robinson who might see more playing time, it just looks like they need to do something. And Andre Johnson isn't his former self. He's not taking off any of the pressure, or maybe they're just not targeting him right. It just seems like they're lacking. Dwayne Allen, their main tight end. I guess they're really a two tight end team with Kobe Fleener. But Dwayne Allen went down with an ankle injury, so you just got a lot in flux there. T.Y. Hilton is the staple, but at the same time, I think Benjamin could be useful. I think the Browns' offense is gonna stay conservative for now. Um, right now, they're in a position where a they're in a weaker conference, um, so that they're looking probably at right now. They haven't given up hope that like it's still early in the season, so nobody's giving up hope, but they think they have enough on defense and that they have enough in game management that they can kind of grind out a few games. So they're gonna give a ton of carries. They're splitting carries between Cromwell and what's the other running back's name? Cromwell and Duke Johnson. So they're Duke Johnson I think had what 14? Yeah, 12 carries to Kwamell's 15. So they're running the ball a lot. They're chewing the clock. They're trying to eat up games, and they're picking and choosing their spots to go deep. They're picking and choosing their spots for the big play. Benjamin actually had a kickoff return for a touchdown. So they do provide you with some special teams utility. But I think that, like you say, they're conservative by nature because they don't want to just say, Menzel, here's the team, here's the keys, go crazy. Whereas I think Buffalo is a little bit more open to saying, hey, Tyrod, if you can make a play, make a play. Mainly because our defense can back you up, but also as long as you're not making, we would rather have you run it for 20 yards or try to run it for 20 yards than to throw the pick. And even though he had 3 picks this weekend, they still put him in position to say, go out there, do it. The running back position, is tough this year just because I think that there were supposed to be a deeper field of running backs than we had. Like I kind of talked about running back waiver wires, but like Dion Lewis is a name that comes out in New England, but obviously you kind of want to stay away from New England. I have McCoy defense, but I like the other. Yeah, I mean Cam. The only problem with Cam right now is he has nobody to throw to. I mean he's going to Olsen a lot. I think Olsen led in targets again this week. He's been there the Carolina Panthers leader in targets for the past few weeks. Devin Funchess is a player that I thought of early in the season, but after week 1 I just saw that they're just not throwing it enough to the wide receivers, and then he had another week this week where he was only a one catch kind of player. So without Kelvin Benjamin, without a go-to receiving threat, Carolina just is going to do the same thing that Cleveland's doing. They're going to be very conservative, let their defense keep them in it. Their defense actually scores a lot. It was 2 weekends ago, first week of the season, their defense had like 28 fantasy points. So they're player makers on the other side of the ball. And when you have a player like Cam who can kind of make and create his own thing, um, and with Jonathan Stewart in the backfield, who's getting touches but just not getting him in the red zone because Cam's doing that, uh, you have a team that is just tough to, really have a lot of fantasy value in, especially in that wide receiver core. Greg Olsen is a great player to own, but other than that, I don't like many Panthers. Um, Sticking with owning too many players on one team is something I struggle with too. Mainly because I'll see a team that has what I think of as a lot of fantasy value. A team that's gonna be in high scoring games every week. Like one team like that this season I see is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is going to put up points everywhere. Antonio Brown's going to be great. Ben Roethlisberger is going to be great. Even in bad games, Ben Roethlisberger seems to throw a lot of yards. So like you'll have games like against San Francisco where he's throwing 4 touchdowns, and nearly 400 yards. And then you'll have games like against New England where it's not a good game, where they struggled in the red zone, but will still put up 300 plus yards and a touchdown, and have a decent fantasy day. So there's just a lot of. Plus, you have Le'Veon Bell in the backfield, and everything that I've seen out of the Steelers' line in how D'Angelo Williams has been running means Le'Veon Bell might explode. I think that everybody's drafted him. He was a high draft pick anyway, even though you knew he was going to miss 2 games because of how talented he is. But man, am I envious of people who have Bell, especially people who have had Bell and have been able to survive the past 2 weeks without him, because that means your team is going to be so strong now that he's off suspension. Because the Steelers are going to be in a lot of games like they were this past weekend. I think the Steelers are just a strong team. Plus, their defense isn't amazing, so they're going to be in shootouts, and that's just great fantasy-wise. I mean, I actually was looking at the Steelers' defense this week, mainly because the Steelers' defense is one that not a lot of people think to own. I think they're not available in my league because somebody is a diehard Steelers fan. But the Steelers... Oh, no, they are available. But they're going against St. Louis, who has been so up and down. And I just don't trust Nick Foles. And I don't think Nick Foles has the wide receivers on his team. And without a true running back yet, Gurley might be back this week, but we're not sure. Trey Mason's still dealing with an injury. And if you're the best player on the offensive side of the ball for you is Benny Cunningham, you're in trouble. The Redskins are a team that I don't trust in their receiving core. I think Pierre Garçon, if you have him, I'd say keep him. But Deshaun Jackson, it's tough to say drop him just because Deshaun Jackson has that ability. But he hasn't been historically good without. He hasn't been great without. He hasn't been great without RG3. I would say out of those two, I would keep Decker just because I have high hopes for the Jets' continued offensive production. Brandon Marshall had another good game, but Decker is playing again, with him, and Fitzpatrick is really developing into a good quarterback. Fitzpatrick might be a quarterback. If you want to drop Menzel and look for somebody else, Fitzpatrick might be a quarterback to go after. But is he droppable? I would say Deshaun Jackson is droppable if there's somebody who you can attempt to pick up that you think can be a starter now. Because Deshaun, I think, is a player that will take his time finding his way into a new role. Like when he comes back, I mean, I think he'll eat into Jordan Reed's targets a little bit, kind of that possession play. But Deshaun, as a deep threat and the big plays that we think of Deshaun Jackson for, you're not going to get that with a quarterback like they have in Washington. Just because he doesn't have the ability to get those deep balls, and Kirk Cousins also tends to be turnover prone. So they're trying to limit his playbook. That's why you saw Matt Jones have 20 carries and Alfred Morris have like another 19. They're really trying to, again, like they have in Cleveland, shorten the playbook, make it condensed, try to keep themselves in games. And that's why I just think that Deshaun Jackson is not the receiver to own in Washington. And I think that Washington's going to have a tough time throwing the ball. They're in a conference, not only in a conference, but they have a schedule that's set up so that they could have really good games. Like they're playing weak secondaries often. But I would say if you can find somebody on the waiver wire who you're comfortable with, I know your league has a small bench, so you might have some players on the waiver wire that jump out at you. I would go ahead and add them for Deshaun Jackson, just because I don't think Deshaun Jackson is somebody who is worth a stash, especially with how you describe your league and having such a minimalistic bench. I don't think somebody's going to go out and grab Deshaun Jackson after they see him drop and be like, oh, I'm going to wait until Deshaun Jackson's healthy and can prove himself in the offense. Yeah, if you're having guys, if your bench is like that where you have a lot of upside players, I mean, Matt Jones has a good matchup this coming Thursday night. Um, it's going to be a short week, so the offenses in short weeks tend to not have as much in terms of prep time. Even though Thursday night football usually favors offense, because defenses having less prep time is less important. But because you don't have prep time, what's the easiest thing to do? Just take 2 steps and hand it the ball off. I think also with Matt Jones being a high draft pick for the Redskins, it makes sense that they're trying to incorporate him more in the offense. Especially because Alfred Morris was a guy who fit a certain offense that involved RG3, involved mobility, involved a lot of different holes, a lot of different cutback lanes. Matt Jones is just an overall, in my mind, more every down playable back. Um, so I think he's a guy with more upside than Alfred Morris. And Alfred Morris is somebody you're talking about maybe a third round draft pick in fantasy football. So when you have somebody like Matt Jones become available, um, drop Deshaun Jackson for Matt Jones, I say I would do that. Um, Especially because Matt Jones, I feel like Matt Jones is going to be like the first name off the waiver wire this week. That's just how I feel. Especially because a lot of people are going to pick him up and immediately play him against the Giants, who have had a little bit of success stopping the run, but only in my mind because they're playing really horrific run defense teams or run offense teams. You have Dallas, who doesn't know who their running back is, and you had Atlanta, whose running back went down in the first quarter, and their backup guy is known as a back out of the backfield pass catcher. So this will be the first time that they see a heavy dose of run, and their defense, especially in their linebacking core, is not that great. Okay. Well, I'm almost out done. I only have really 2 positions to go over. I'll give you the list of players that I listed for wide receiver. Wide receiver, I looked at Doug Baldwin, who's not owned in a lot of leagues. Darius Hayward Bay, And this kind of goes back to my discussion of Marcus Whedon a couple weeks ago, where I thought Marcus Whedon would develop in the Pittsburgh offense. But Hayward Bay has come to be that third option. And he'll be the third option for the next 2 weeks while Martavis Bryant's out. Darius Hayward Bay is also their deep threat. So, kind of like what we were talking about with Travis Benjamin. If you have it, and it works even more so with the Steelers, a team that's going to be putting up big numbers on offense. Deep plays, deep passes. If you're only going to get a guy like 5 targets in a game, I want those 5 targets to be down the field. I don't want him to get 5 targets around the line of scrimmage. I don't want him to be a player that is a slot guy if he's not going to see a lot of targets. I want him to be a deep threat. And Darius Hayward Bay has settled into the role of deep threat. Would I drop Deshaun for Travis Benjamin? I would. But I'm not married to Deshaun. I think that's the thing. I think Deshaun in a certain offense is a better player than Travis Benjamin. I have no doubt about that. I just think that Travis Benjamin, in how he's going to be used in Cleveland, is the higher play, is the better play fantasy point-wise. You only have to really look at, if we looked at Jackson, or if it wants to search, there we go. If we look at Deshaun Jackson, he hasn't played at all. Thursday night's a quick turnaround, so he's not going to play there. Home against Philly is probably the first game that he has a potential to play. But as we've seen with hamstrings can linger. Like Victor Cruz has a hamstring, and he's still going to be out. He may play week 4. There's just nothing to me that says that Deshaun Jackson's going to come back and be an immediate home run threat. Especially because they're not going to use him like that. I mean, Kirk Cousins just doesn't have that. Even if Deshaun Jackson can get open deep down the field, I don't think Kirk Cousins has a deep ball that can get him that pass. Whereas Johnny Manziel, as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, can and is ready and willing to air it out to Travis Benjamin. He's willing to try, and he's willing to go for that. And I think that's where the Cleveland Browns playbook is we're going to take a few shots, and Travis Benjamin is going to be the man to go get those shots. He's our speed threat. He's our deep threat. He's the one we're going to. Whereas Deshaun is going to come back into a system where you have a backup quarterback who now is familiar with Pierre Garçon, who's now familiar with Jordan Reed, who's now got 2 running backs to lean on. It's just hard for me to see Deshaun Jackson coming back in and being a big target. I could be wrong, and I might be wrong with Deshaun Jackson. It's just I am not married to him. I would say pick up Travis Benjamin. I mean, I would pick up Travis Benjamin. I would pick up Matt Jones. There's a lot of players that I would drop Deshaun Jackson for. Especially because if you, like you say, you have a short bench in your league. These are guys who you can plug in right away. Like Matt Jones is somebody you can plug in this week. Travis Benjamin is somebody who I think gives you utility for, as long as Johnny Manziel is the quarterback. He's got an upside. And if your league counts receiving yard, or not receiving yards, return yards or return touchdowns, Travis Benjamin's a great play there. So I mean, there's just a lot of versatility there. Yeah. And in terms of tight ends, one of the tight ends I like is Jordan Reed for that specific reason. Because you have a quarterback like Kirk Cousins who's not airing it out. He's looking closer to the line. Those 2 receivers are Pierre Garçon and Jordan Reed. And with a good matchup this week against the Giants, unfortunately, Jordan Reed seems to be a player that you can go get. Another player that you can go get is Eric Ebron, who's getting the touchdown and Renzo looks from Matt Stafford. And then you have Crocky Gilmore, who exploded with 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards for the Baltimore Ravens. All of these guys serve the same role. They are possession tight ends in offenses that are looking for some kind of stability. The Ravens don't know what they're doing running the ball. They're looking at Forsett. They're looking at LaFrenz Talafero. They're still not getting a lot of traction there. They're putting a lot of carries into the ground game, but they're not getting a lot of results. Their wide receiving core without Torrey Smith, without that over-the-top threat, is just Steve Smith and a bunch of names. So Crockett Gilmore comes in to fill that number 2 role. Jordan Reed is the same thing in Washington. You have a tight end coming in to fill that number 2 role because you have Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson's out, bunch of other no names. So it's Jordan Reed and Pierre Garçon. Eric Ebron, same thing in Detroit. Possession tight end. Actually, the biggest name on this list can go up and get the ball. High draft pick, high upside. They put a lot into Eric Ebron, so now it makes sense that they go to him. But also, you have Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate's there, but Eric Ebron could easily fill that number 2 spot. Yeah, see, I'm the same way with Forsett. I don't know what Baltimore is doing with Forsett. I don't know if they're being conservative with him. I don't know if it's just truly that their offensive line cannot block right now. They did have some changeover over the offseason, but they were a really great running team last year. A really consistent running team. Like, Forsett never had huge games, but he had very consistently decent games. And it's just, he's slowly coming into that. But when you're having a player like Talafero take his red zone carries, I mean, I just don't really... And they also have another backup who had a decent week 1. Actually had a better week 1 than Forsett. Trying to think of his name. I can probably pull it up. There's only so many running backs with points right now. Javarius Allen. I mean, 35 yards isn't a lot, and he didn't get any carries this week, but it's still, I'm not sure if Baltimore is looking to kind of get into a committee situation when they have a running back that I feel like they should be content with. Just not sure what they're thinking there. But that's somebody in terms of... I've been putting Forsett in a lot of my trade offers to start the season. Mainly because I have a quarterback who I want to pick up in Tyrod Taylor. I know that I'm on the Tyler Taylor fan bus. But a quarterback I want to pick up in Tyrod Taylor. And I have a good quarterbacks in a couple leagues. So Tyrod Taylor being picked up. I've already put the waiver wire claim in for him in the Twitch league. Just because we really don't have a great quarterback situation in the league that we drafted on stream. But in my money league, I have 2 great quarterbacks in a league that overvalues quarterbacks in terms of their touchdown points. But at the same time, I want to have Tyrod Taylor there as my backup and just go with Ben. And see if I can get something for Peyton, especially after a good game last week. If he has one more good game, I think I can really make a move for a big-time wide receiver. That's an interesting question. I think Kelsey provides you with a lot of trade value. He's the sexier name. He's also in an offense that doesn't value... Like, it has Jeremy Maclin now, but they tend to go through running backs and tight ends. Like, Kelsey had a huge week 1, and people still have that stuck in their mind. So even though I think his week 2 wasn't great against Denver, because I watched that game, and he's not available, so I'm going to have to look at his stats. Oh, 58 yards is nothing to sneeze at, especially against a really good Denver defense. But in terms of who to go for, that's at the wide receiver position. See, there's a lot of wide receivers that I'm looking at trying to trade for. Well, actually, I've noticed that a lot of people in my league are looking for tight ends just because that even though there are a lot of tight ends that are doing well, they're not content with. Like, there's obviously Rob and Cassie. Like in this league, I actually have the 4 and 5 tight end. Like after the two you have in Tyler and Travis Kelce, there's a deep drop off. Like Austin Stephen Jenkins is out for the next 4 weeks. Jason Witten has 2 banged up ankles. Crockett Gilmore, that's off of 1 game. Eric Ebron, another player we talked about, and these next three, the 3 tight ends that I just talked about, are available in a lot of leagues. So I know tight ends are doing well, and there are players to add instead of trade for, but you have the best tight ends outside of Robbie Gronkowski, so you have to treat it like that. And tight end's a position that most people are going to concede is not going to be a good position for them. Like I'm willing to get rid of Jason Wooden or Austin Stephen Jenkins. I'm going to end up dropping because he's out for 4 weeks. Um, but you have I don't think you should sell yourself short at the tight end position. You have a very strong tight end position, so whoever, yeah, um, yeah. I think that the only problem I see with waiting too long is if the tight end, like a tight end needy team in your league, on the waiver wire is going to go for Eric Ebron, Crockett Gilmore, Jordan Reed, because all 3 are good options. Um, they're not better options than what you're offering in Kelsey. I think Kelsey's the one to offer just because Eifert is in an offense where he's kind of sneaky. He's actually doing better than Khalees, but he's not the sexier name. Khalees has the boom potential, and people kind of he's a known commodity. Eifert is a good tight end, but people think of him as like a top 10 versus one of the like versus a little Gronk. People think of Khalees as a little Gronk. So I think you can get more for him. In terms of what to shoot for, that's kind of hard. Mainly because you're in a position like I am of trying to trade for a wide receiver in a year where wide receivers are making very little sense. Like Larry Fitzgerald is one player that I would love, but I don't believe I can get. Just because, like, if you look at the top 3 wide receivers, it's Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Travis Benjamin, Larry Fitzgerald, and Julian Edelman. Of those 5, who I think are going to stay in the top 5, I think Antonio Brown will. I think Julio Jones will. I think Travis Benjamin will fall out of that, but I think he's going to be decent. Larry Fitzgerald, I have no idea. I thought Larry Fitzgerald was done as a major being incorporated in the offense, but that was mainly because he hasn't played with Carson Palmer in about 2 years. So I think that if you have Larry Fitzgerald, people might be hesitant to think that Larry Fitzgerald is back, which might be able to give you a top flight wide receiver on the cheap. So Larry Fitzgerald is somebody to go at. Julian Edelman might be somebody to go at. It might be hard to get a team to let go of him just because he's such a target monster. I mean, he had like 19 targets this week. But people might not be as married to him if they're that weak at tight end because Julian Edelman didn't cost them a high draft pick. Julian Edelman's not somebody they picked up in the first, 5 rounds. So because they're not married to him, that's an interesting point. If you're trying to move Kelsey for T.Y. Hilton, since the owner's starting Dwayne Allen. See, if they're in that position where they start Dwayne Allen, who got 0 points and is potentially going to be down for a little while, I think they're going to hit the waiver wire to try to replace him. Just because if you're tight end needy, this is the week to do the waiver wire. So I think that this week, if you're looking for a T.Y. Hilton or you're looking for somebody with some upside, it might not be the week to move on them, like you're saying. You might wait it out. I would say wait out another 2 weeks because I'm sure in the next 2 weeks, I think Kelsey will have a good game. Like if you look at who he's going against, he has some good matchups coming forward. In terms of, I would say he's the one to trade because they have Green Bay on a Monday night game. Now Green Bay is a team who's going to challenge the Chiefs, so the Chiefs are going to be looking for some offense. And Green Bay is not a great defensive team. Like they're not amazing in the secondary. They just can score. They can outscore people. Like I mean, Seattle put up a good number of points, even though like I think it was 17. But Seattle doesn't have a receiver at all. I mean, Jimmy Graham disappeared, which is part of the reason. But it wasn't because the tight end position was well covered. It has more to do with the fact that Seattle's game plan was just bad. So if you waited out like a couple weeks, the Green Bay game, Cincinnati's linebacking core is more pressure oriented than coverage oriented. I mean, there's a couple weeks there. Like I would consider Cincinnati a very close parallel to Houston, and Khalees ate up Houston. So I'm just trying to show that there's a couple weeks that are not great matchups, but really good for the tight end. And then you have Chicago, who can't play anybody. So in the next 3 weeks, there's some really good tight end matchups for him. And if he has just one more huge week, then he becomes easily tradable. And even if he doesn't, people still have him as a valued target. So if you wait a couple weeks, or the only thing I'm trying to kind of talk through is, can you wait a couple weeks? Do you need that wide receiver trade now? Like, I feel like I need that wide receiver trade soon. So I'm kind of trying to get Forsett and Peyton Manning involved in trade talks. But that's because, and I think that if I wait another week, which I probably can afford to do, I should win this week in the money league that I'm talking about, with the team that I have, especially with I think I'm going to have a decent waiver wire pickup. Because of that, I feel like if I waited on Peyton Manning's got the more he gets suited to this offense, the better he's going to do, the easier it will be to trade him. Especially because the quarterback position is going to normalize. You're going to have like players who have Sam Bradford starting, who starts to get desperate. Starting Vincent Jackson, Steve Smith. Steve Smith gives you something. Vincent Jackson is tough. I'll give you that. Yeah, I feel like, a little desperate. I would say give it at least the Green Bay game on Monday night. Give it at least the Green Bay game, because everybody's going to watch Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football is the only game on. So people are going to watch that game. So if he shows out, then everybody in your league is going to be like, I kind of want him. I kind of want to play him. So, and even if not, they're going to see that he's going to be involved in the offense. And Green Bay has like Clay Matthews, but they have linebackers who are involved in the pass rush. So Khalees is either going to be on safeties or it's going to be on second-tier linebackers who can't cover him. I think if you can hold out one more week, you'll get a lot more trade value for him. And I think the K.Y. Hilton deal is actually a logical deal, because K.Y. Hilton hasn't been playing great. The Colts' offense hasn't been playing great. So you can probably get a K.Y. from somebody, whereas usually they wouldn't do that, because K.Y. is probably might have been their second or third receiver taken overall. Like in terms of their draft strategy, he's a third round, fourth round receiver, and so you're trading up in terms of the draft, because Khalees is probably a 7th round tight end, just because people don't draft tight ends other than Rob Gronkowski really early. But I think that wait Monday night out, just because a lot of people are going to look at the Monday night game, and if they see Khalees do very well, then you're golden. And even if he doesn't do great, if he's involved, if he gets a lot of targets, people like me who, pay attention to that stuff in fantasy football might think that it's a gamble, but at least my tight end position is set, and I don't have to worry about it. There's some positions that I like to be like that, like quarterback. I want to trade Peyton Manning for the sole reason that I want to have a position where I just set it and forget. I know who my starting quarterback is this week, regardless of matchup, because he's that good. And that's what I think Ben Roethlisberger is for me. So, yeah, that would be what I would say to you. Steve Smith, I think, can hold you out. I think Steve Smith will be there. And I think that if you, are looking at the waiver wire, Travis Benjamin, maybe a Doug Baldwin, will do better for you than Vincent Jackson. Just because I think the Bucs offense is, like we were talking about before, they leaned on Doug Martin heavily. He got 20-plus carries. And they're starting to do more with the running attack. Mike Evans is also is back. He was back this week, but he didn't get a catch. But he's coming back, so he's going to eat into Vincent Jackson's value. The one good thing for Vincent Jackson is that their rookie tight end is out. But I think that speaks more to security blanket for Jameis Winston. And if the tight end's not there, it's dump offs to the running back. I'm still holding out hope for Doug Martin to be really good this fantasy season. Right now he's in the 30 range, but I think he's going to jump up. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to that. But I think Steve Smith, if I had Steve Smith, I'd be okay. I wouldn't think I'm desperate if I had Steve Smith. But Vincent Jackson, I think you can actually upgrade that position just off waiver wire. So I would say that you can hold out at least one more week on Achilles. And I guess the last thing for the show, because the show actually has gone longer than I thought. Thanks, Drinking, for actually providing great questions to talk about. But it's defenses. And I'm going to only go through the defenses in the fact that there are matchups that are interesting that you might want to consider. Not necessarily because they're going to be the best defense of the week. I should probably go back to all available. There we go. So in available defenses, there are two teams that I particularly think have good matchups for this upcoming week, and those teams are the Pittsburgh Steelers against St. Louis, just because, like I was going for, I don't see Nick Foles as a truly starting quarterback. I think the Steelers will get out in front of St. Louis quickly, and when they do that, their defense won't have to worry. I mean, the defense will probably, because St. Louis does one thing well, and that's run and pressure the quarterback. Neither of those two things I think they can do to the Pittsburgh Steelers. One, because Pittsburgh's offensive line is good. We've seen that now 2 straight weeks where they've been very good. Running the ball, throwing the ball, just moving the ball on offense. They're going up and down the field at will. I don't think that stops in St. Louis. St. Louis's corners aren't great. Their safeties are mediocre. Their strength is their defensive front. And if they can't get to Ben Roethlisberger, who's a hard quarterback to bring down anyway, they're not going to keep him. They're not going to be able to stay in this game. Their linebacking core is not good. So you have a team that just presents everything to be able to kind of blow the doors off the game. And St. Louis on the other side of the ball doesn't really have any, scary options. I mean, they have Jared Cook, they have Trevon Austin, but those guys aren't really playing that well. And that has more to do with their quarterback play in Nick Foles than anything else. They have good running backs, but in a game where you're going to see Pittsburgh, probably put pressure on. I think St. Louis can make it a game, and their defense, I don't want to say they're bad, because they have great players on the defensive side of the ball that can make game-changing plays. It's just that they're a team that I feel like Houston. Their defense could be really strong, but it's missing some vital components that make it weaker. The other team that I think might have a good shot at being a good defense this week is the Atlanta Falcons. Not because the Atlanta Falcons are a good defense, and they have problems across the board, but because they're playing Dallas. And Dallas, without Dez and without Tony Romo, without DeMarco Murray, without a starting running back that they can rely on, Dallas is kind of a team in search of an identity. And you never want that team to be your starting fantasy. Like, this is the week that if you have a Dallas player, consider benching it, just because they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. If Witten's out too, then you're talking about the three biggest players on their offense not being in the game. So that's kind of huge. That's very huge. And I think that going forward, Dallas will be fine. It's just that in that first week, after losing your starting quarterback, after the week before losing your big time, number one receiver off the board in most leagues, you gotta think that team's reeling a little bit. Even though they're 2-0, they're reeling, just because they don't know what they're gonna get going forward. And Atlanta's a team that can put pressure on you because they're such a high-powered offense, because they have Matt Ryan, because they throw deep, because they have Julio Jones. The Browns at home against the Raiders could be as well. Yeah, I mean, they have a very good secondary. Like, Screen and... I'm blanking on his name. He's their true cover corner. The Raiders, however, is a team that I kind of think is better than most people give them credit for. Latavius Murray gives them a lot of versatility out of the backfield. David Carr is kind of coming into his own, but he's a little bit further along. Joe Hayden, thank you, because that would have bothered me. Joe Hayden's a true shutdown corner. Screen on the other side. Yeah. Oh, Screen went to the Jets? Dang, the Jets got good. But, okay. But, Carl Stansby from the Cardinals. Okay. Yeah, and Cleveland is a defense that like we were talking about earlier, they're going to be conservative because they have a decent defense. I like what the Raiders can do. Just because they have receiving threats. They have Cooper, they have Crabtree. I mean, they haven't really showcased. They beat Baltimore, and Baltimore had a defense that was good enough to stand up to Peyton Manning, although Peyton Manning obviously didn't play well that game. But the Raiders are an interesting team. Like, I'm not sure if... I know Cleveland at home is better than Cleveland away. My only concern would be that David Carr in that offense, not that they score a lot on Cleveland, but that they don't make a lot of mistakes. Oh, well, have fun in Vegas, man. I'll catch you later. But yeah, and we're wrapping up anyway. So, but yeah, the other team is the last team that I wanted to talk about was the Redskins. The Redskins are a team that is going against the Giants on Thursday night. The Giants' offense at times looks great, but they're so turnover prone. They're still mistake prone. That I think that because the Redskins have a pressure-oriented defense, a sacking defense, that if they get one turnover, they could get a pick six. They could get they could have a very good game. And the real problem with the Giants is I'm trying to upload the videos to YouTube, and the problem that I'm having right now is that like I had one video uploaded. Yeah, I had one video of Friday's like week one stream uploaded. I uploaded week two, and I had a copyright issue um, with because I showed some Doug Martin footage in the episode two stream, so it should be okay. I'll put the YouTube link in the chat for you. Um, there we go. So that's the YouTube link. If you go to that, it will probably be up Friday evening. So y'all be in Vegas, so. But maybe like if you get up Saturday morning, it should be there for you. I'm just hoping that it doesn't. I don't have any too many copyright issues because I had one with the week two stream. So uh, we'll see. Going forward, it should be okay. I've been now letterboxing stuff. I haven't been switching to the full screen for the NFL page, so we should be all right going forward. But if not, what you can always do is come to twitch.tv /conscious thought, and the video will be in past broadcasts. So that's another way if in case you can't get to in case the YouTube link doesn't work for you. But that's going to do it for the inaugural Tuesday stream. We had more to talk about than I thought, so yeah. And I mean, it was. I think it's YouTube's because it was video. I think that was the only thing about it because I played NFL video, um, and I had sound on, like I had sound on so we could hear like the movements and the announcers. So I think that's what it was. I think from now on we should be good. And even if I do show some video, I'll try to get it off of secondhand broadcast like ESPN or something like that, so that it's not proprietary NFL footage, and we should be okay. Because I do want to incorporate more video. I do want to be able to diagnose more plays, more reasons why I'm targeting players, or more reasons why people should look at certain players. Like I wanted to do that with Travis Benjamin today, but I didn't. I wasn't able to find the clips that I needed outside of the NFL Network. So hopefully we'll do that in the future. But have a safe trip, man. And for everybody else watching, or everybody else who stopped by, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And let's continue. If you have questions, please hit me up in messages. And I thank you guys for sticking around. And have a great day.